All right, let's dive into something pretty deep today. We're going to explore this fascinating psychological map of a spiritual journey, and our guide is Father Benedict Gretschel from his book Spiritual Passages. We're really going to focus on the psychology of what happens when you start to grow, when you start that journey of letting go of all the stuff that holds you back. So, where does this whole journey even begin? Well, Groeschel says it starts with something we all know, something every great thinker from Augustine to Freud talked about. It's this deep, fundamental anxiety. You know, that haunting feeling about futility, the fear that kind of dogs us from our earliest days. That's our starting point.
Groeschel comes up with this really simple but powerful way to map our spiritual growth. He sees it as an inverse relationship. As one thing goes down, another thing has to go up. And what he's tracking is the dynamic between that deep-seated anxiety we just talked about and a growing sense of inner peace.
Okay, now get this. This chart here visualizes the whole thing perfectly. Look at those two lines. You've got one line going down. That's our fundamental anxiety. Groeschel calls it driven need, which is a great way to put it. It's that pathological, anxious impulse we all have. As that starts to decline, so does our need to be defensive all the time. And while that's happening, look at the other line. It's rising. That's inner peace, spiritual freedom, and the ability to just face reality for what it is. It's literally a journey from fear to truth. But, this journey is never a straight line, right? Those wavy lines on the chart kind of hinted at it. The first major hurdle we hit is a crisis, a real crossroad. And yeah, it's a moment of pain, but it's also this incredible opportunity for growth, even though everything in you is screaming to just turn back. So when you're at this crossroad, man, the pull of your old familiar habits is just incredibly strong. It's like Augustine said. The pleasures we're used to have a much stronger pull than some spiritual goal we haven't even tasted yet. Your progress feels shaky, and when you stumble, it hurts way more than it used to. You're suddenly forced to look at your own subtle selfishness that, let's be honest, you were probably pretty good at ignoring before. And this whole crisis, it boils down to one single question. The most important question, really. It cuts through all the noise, all the defenses. What do you really want? And it's right here at this point that you realize you can't do it on your own. You have to recognize the need for something more, for what the tradition calls grace. So, let's say you manage to push through that crisis. The next stage of the journey brings a totally new kind of challenge. And that's transcending these, let's call them immature forms of faith. They're these comfortable spots we can get stuck in, ways of believing that actually stop us from growing any further. Groeschel points out two major traps here. And they look like total opposites, but psychologically they're super similar. On one hand, you've got the fanatic. Their belief is all fueled by fear, this desperate need to be right that makes them defensive, paranoid. They're always projecting their own inner battles onto some external enemy. Then on the other hand, you have the endless speculator. This person builds their whole self-esteem on being smart, and they get addicted to these mental games, these subtle theories, but they never actually make the leap of faith. So here's the kicker. The fanatic and the speculator, they might argue all day long, but they're both just stuck. They're stuck in this kind of adolescent stage of faith. And the psychological result is exactly the same for both of them. A spiritual life that just leads to bitterness, boredom, and this feeling of frantic, totally unrewarding activity. The only way out of these traps is to make a leap, a real leap of faith. It's a leap into what Groeschel, following spiritual masters like St. John of the Cross, calls mature faith. And this kind of faith, well, it works in a completely different, almost paradoxical way. See, this mature faith isn't about having clearer ideas or winning arguments. In fact, it's kind of the opposite. It's what's known as apophatic faith. That's a Greek term, and it basically means a knowledge that's based on what God is not. It goes way beyond any concept or analogy our rational minds can cook up. It's supposed to be mysterious and obscure, not crystal clear. And this just perfectly illustrates the paradox. St. John of the Cross says this faith is like a light so excessive that it actually blinds our normal intellect. Think about it, like staring at the sun. Its light is so bright, you can't see anything else. He's saying this intuitive knowledge of faith works the same way. It just completely overwhelms and cancels out our regular ways of understanding things. I mean, how do you even describe an experience like that? When the brilliant mathematician and philosopher Blaise Pascal had one of these profound mystical experiences, he tried to write it down. He ended up scribbling it on a piece of parchment that he kept sewn inside his coat for the rest of his life.
And after struggling for words, he landed on just one single powerful word to describe the overwhelming certainty and joy of that moment: fire. So, where does this deepening of faith, this whole movement into mystery, ultimately lead? Well, it leads, maybe inevitably, to the journey's ultimate psychological test, an experience that has been famously called the dark night.
Now, it is so important to understand what this means psychologically. This isn't just about feeling spiritually dry when you pray. A dark night is any profound crisis. The painful loss of someone you love, a major career failure, a deep inner conflict, anything that just shatters your defenses and your illusions. It's that moment when painful reality just breaks through. And Groeschel reminds us, these profound experiences don't just happen in monasteries. Most of them happen at kitchen tables and office desks.
Passing through this darkness is where the really essential lessons are learned. It's where you finally truly realize your own absolute insufficiency, that you just cannot do it alone. And that leads to genuine humility, to accepting you're not in control. You're forced to abandon your ego's agenda, what the Gospels call serving two masters. And then, after all of that, comes the most important part, the experience of being rescued, when a new, gentle light finally begins to dawn. This entire grueling psychological journey, from anxiety through crisis, past immature faith, and into the dark night, it all has a destination. The final outcome is the surrender of that anxious fear we started with. It's arriving at a profound peace that can only come from true abandonment and trust. Cardinal Newman captured this state of mind just perfectly. He wrote this during a really dark and difficult time in his own life, after he'd lost his friends, his career, everything. And yet, in that darkness, he found this incredible trust, this realization of his own purpose and value, this certainty that he could not be thrown away. That's the fruit of this whole journey. But here's a final, really challenging question. If this is the journey, why does so many of us seem to go through these dark nights again and again, only to snap right back to our old ways? Groeschel suggests a powerful psychological reason. We are so used to our anxiety, so weirdly attached to our own melancholy, that real peace is actually terrifying to us, because it would mean giving up control.
And that leaves us with one last thing to think about. If we often prefer our familiar, comfortable anxiety to a peace that feels terrifying, what does that say about us? What cherished ambitions or comforts or illusions would I have to let go of to truly be free?